we're doing. It's one of the, I think, most interesting. You're going to see a lot of connections to our current political era from here, at least maybe some attitudes. This is basically industrialization, urbanization, and immigration, and this is all called the Gilded Age. So these are the things we're going to talk about. It's 3 chapters, and it's going to be political, economic, social, technological. Probably Sprite is really good. Think of Sprite as you go through this material. And I want to show you a picture of the Gilded Age. I'm going to start it today. I might finish with your class, but the other class I wasn't able to finish. Now I'm going to go through it with you, and you can draw the parts that I tell you if you want to draw it. But I think I like linear explanations, so to kind of lay it out. We're comparing it from this era with an earlier era, and later on with an era beyond. So I think it's a good way to see kind of how everything connects, and I think it's very helpful for you to remember and understand. So the first line is where we're at. I got a line 1850, 1900, 1920, etc. Okay? So just draw that line, and we are specifically in this unit going to look at, I need a new color. I want this one. Oops. Okay, so specifically start with 1800 to 1850, and then this era right here, 1877 to 1900, is known as the Gilded Age. Gilded means decorated with gold. And think about it. If you've ever seen like art pieces from like the Egyptians, or sometimes they gild their artwork with gold. They have, it's very thin gold, and what they do is they just kind of put it on their sculptures or something of that nature. And the thing about that is that who's got a water? Can you hand me that? Can I borrow that for a minute?
I do.
I'm not. Oh, it's full. I'm not going to drink it. I just want to show you. If this was gilded, on the outside it would have this golden cover. But if you were to scratch the outside of it, or scratch that off, it would reveal a dirty, gritty, not golden.
If you look on the bottom, there's chips off it.
We'll see. But just imagine it's covered in gold. But if you were to scratch the surface, underneath that surface, that facade, is the gritty reality. And that's what I want you to think about here. On the surface, this era is wonderful. We have a massive production, American industry. We have tons of jobs. We have massive wealth is created. All kinds of wonderful measures. People would say, yeah, that's great. Make America great again. This was great for America, at least on the surface. Underneath all of this wonderful industrial growth were major problems. And that's going to be very important to the development of the United States, etc. So that's kind of what this is going to be about. So we have the Gilded Age, around 1877 to 1900. You can't really just I put that there for the Reconstruction, just as an easy break, right? Usually it's a trend. Industrialization started 1840s, 30s, and just grew and grew and grew. But what's significant about 1900, though? Remember, we started with 1800 to 1850. I gave you all the data about all these different developments. Remember the acronym we made? Sit up. Mm-hmm. Remember that one? So it was number of states, industrialization, territorial expansion,
Urbanization.
urbanization, population growth. Yeah, that's basically most of it. We see that, so we have that, we already know, but the significance is the seeds of the 19th century, late 19th century, are planted in the early 19th century. And these trends or these developments that begin early in the century mature in the late part of the century. And that's a big idea. So, and I'll go through each one of those. 1800, around 1850, who was the number one industrial power in the world?
England, Great Britain.
1850. It was England.
Yeah.
England was the number one industrial power in the world. We start our industrialization at that time, but by 1900, we are number one industrial production in the world. We're probably beating England and France together. For sure, by end of World War I, we are outproducing England, France, Germany, etc. So that's a lot of development in this era, industrially. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that. We want to find out. Think of Sprite: social, political, religious, intellectual, technological, and economic aspects to this era. That's your end game. You with us? Mm-hmm. Sprite. Know the Sprite for this era. Other things that we talked about. Territorial expansion, for example. That's what this line is, okay? Oh, you really can't tell what the difference is. Territorial expansion. Before 1850, what was territorial expansion like? Do you remember? Western expansion. We get California, Mexican War. We get Florida. We buy it from Adams-Onis Treaty from Spain. We get Texas. We annex it, right? We get Oregon territory, right? So that's all continental United States. Do you guys know that term?
Yeah.
So after 1850, we continue to expand, but it's overseas expansion. It means it's not in the territorial continental United States, okay? So places like Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Philippine Islands, Panama, specifically the canal, we get that all before 1900. It's called the new expansion. You with us?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
The new expansion.
What is it?
It's the territorial expansion.
Good. Where? Okay. The reason why I'm drawing this is so you can have a linear understanding of it. So try to do it,
Okay.
and that will help you focus. Okay. So again, you see where I'm putting these examples. So now you're going to compare that to the early 19th century. So late 19th century, early 19th century. Total contrast. If you know how we expanded, that's one piece, boom, you got it. Really easy, all right? That's chapter, I think, 20. We're skipping chapter 16. We're starting on chapter 17, industrial development. Tonight, if you want to look, I'm going to print out the copies for you, but we're good to go there. So you can take another night off if you want. But that's going to be chapter 20 in our foreign policy in this era, okay? Urbanization, that's another big trend that starts in this early era and comes back in the late 19th century. And here's the one idea I want to share with this. Before 1850, where do most people live?
In the southeast countries.
It's rural or urban? Rural, very good. Before 1850, most people live in the countryside and work in the countryside, etc. And my point here is, by 1900, most people at 1900, most people live in cities. So that tells you have a massive expansion of the cities. What cities are growing? Why are they growing? What are the consequences of the growth? what are characteristics of the growth? All of those things are what you want to look for with the urbanization. And the short answer is, well, there is no short answer, I guess, but there's a number of things we're going to pay attention to there. But, think about this. Toledo, Cincinnati, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Buffalo, all of these cities are going to explode in population at this time. The next element is immigration. Immigration and urbanization are so close together. Who do you think is moving to these cities? Are the immigrants from overseas, right? And they're different immigrants. They're from Southern and Eastern Europe. That's a big idea. They're not traditional WASPs. They're not traditional English, Irish, or Germans. They're now Polish, Russian, Italian, Jews, Greeks, etc. So that's a total, again, you go back, what were the earlier immigrants? Irish, German, English, traditionally. African, you could say also. But now, in the second half, and it really explodes here. And by the way, it doesn't stop at 1900. Immigration continues all up to about 1920. 1920 is a big watershed date. 1920, lots of things are changing, and they're more conservative. 1920s was a very conservative. Means they didn't want any more change. They're tired of the change. Reminds me of our era today. Trump is typical of the attitudes of the leadership in 1920s, especially the Republicans. Republicans in 1920 basically say no reforms. No, we want to go back to the way it was earlier. We want to go back to the Gilded Age. Bam. Okay, this era here, 1900, 1920, is an era of reform. An era of reform. We call it the progressive era. And the way this all fits together, and I really want, you have to see it this way, is that this era was massive growth, Gilded Age, massive growth, massive problems. So good things and bad things. That leads to the progressives, 1900, 1920, which was an era of, hey, let's fix the problems that were created here. Let's fix them here. You follow? This is very, very important. And so here, it's laissez-faire. When we talk about politics, another one, politics, Democrats and Republicans. Laissez-faire is the attitude. Laissez-faire is the attitude for both of them until 1900. Right around 1900, they are going for government interaction, government intervention. Let's fix the problems in America. And who can fix it? We can't trust the business people to monitor themselves, can we?
No.
No, never. The business people are there to make profit, and anything that reduces profit is bad for business. So that means if you can't make them work 12 hours a day and they have to work, have to hire more people, then that's going to hurt their profits, right? So the significance is, in this era till 1900, predominant attitude laissez-faire. No government interference. Government is run, both Democrats and the Republicans were laissez-faire. Anti-labor, anti-unions. No laws, like pollution and working conditions. None of that stuff's going on here. And the government resisted it and rejected those calls generally. One second. But again, this is going to be characterized of this Gilded Age. Another thing we're going to look at, industrialization. How do we become the #1 industrial power in America, or in the world, excuse me? What are the elements of it? Who is involved? What is the technology like? What are the consequences of it? What are the characteristics of this industrial development? In essence, you got urbanization, industrialization, and immigration. All are connected, all are totally interconnected, and then they have consequences for politics and social, which is another aspect. How do these immigrants get along? What do the people think about what's happening in this era? I know it's kind of messy. We can do it again tomorrow, neater, but you should get the big pieces, because that's all the stuff we want to understand. Okay.
Is the Gilded Age when the guy, I don't know, Sinclair or something, wrote about the jungle?
Yes. Upton Sinclair. For sure, we're going to read an excerpt of it. And it was about the meat packing industry,
And
saying,
rats and stuff? Is that-
saying how, yeah, that they have no regulations, and so rotten beef and diseased beef was processed. No government nobody was checking on the business people, and so they did whatever they want. Now, most of it probably worked well, but there's still, rotten meat was processed, right? And working conditions were really problematic. I mean, just a lot of problematic things.
Reading about it, and it said that there were like rats that died and got into the meat somehow and were processed too.
Yeah, everything's processed. Sometimes people fall into the vats and they get processed.
All right, didn't read that far, but that's wow.
It's one of the things, that you see in this era, like pollution. Do you think they cared about the workers? No, they used them up and spit them out. And when they were done with them, they could get another person out of the pool that needed, jobs. There's tons of immigrants, low pay, bad working conditions, and then you get these progressives reforming. Can I reinforce this a minute? So if this is 1920, 30, and then this is 1900, and this, we'll just say 1850. So this Gilded Age, what are the characteristics of the Gilded Age? You have industrialization, immigration, urbanization. Those are the big three. All right, that's the big three. What's going on in the Gilded Age? All right. Meanwhile, you're going to get some expansion, but the politics are going to reflect this. Basically, the industry is going to create massive amount of money, and that's going to be used to control politics. If you have the money, you get the influence in our government. They're going to bribe, and you're going to have officials that are going to be beholding to the industrialists, okay? And they're going to want their laws that are passed to help them. Laws against unions, laws against preventing regulations, lower taxes, okay? So basically, industry is going to control politics. That's not new, is it? Okay. And then the big connection is the problems created here. Massive problems are created here from all of this. Corruption, pollution, poverty, illiteracy, dirty cities, difficult living conditions. All of these things are going to kind of basically meld together. And that's going to get people to say, hey, we want to change that. We want to fix these problems. Here is the progressive era. The progressives say, let's fix this era. Let's fix it. The problems of what? Industrialization. Let's fix the problems of industrialization. That's what the progressives did. Both Democrats and Republicans, basically WASP, said, hey, these immigrants are ruining the city. Let's fix it. Prohibition. 18th Amendment. Prohibition. And then it'd say, hey, let's get corruption out of government. How can we reduce corruption? By expanding democracy. 19th Amendment, women's vote. The progressives get it done. Okay? Hey, let's end child labor. Let's protect unions. Let's have the corporations pay taxes. Let's prevent corruption in the cities, etc., etc. That's all going to be progressive attitudes. Let's protect the environment. Let's preserve the natural resources and have parks. Theodore Roosevelt, progressive. So this is a massive change here, isn't it? So without this, you cannot understand this. All right? So you have to get the connections. And then lastly, the 20s, they say no more reforms. And the attitudes change. A lot like what we are experiencing now. The reforms we have now is to cut government and to limit immigration. That's what they do here. Limit immigration. It's called nativism. Nativism was going on here and here, by the way. It wasn't new, but here we have laws limiting immigration. Again, Muslims were not allowed at this era either. Okay? The 20s, very much, I think we're in an era that's very similar to the 20s. Dominated by the Republicans, who basically want to go back to the Gilded Age. Let's go back to laissez-faire. No government regulations, low taxes, no protection for the workers. Maybe not no, but fewer protections for the workers, fewer laws limiting business. And this is a booming economy. This is a very strong economics. There's lots of money being made. Until right here we have the Great Depression. And then we go into the massive decline for the next 30, let's see, 30, 40, 20 years. 20 years of economic decline. Massive, massive economic decline. And nobody to help. Government was pretty much gone, or at least not. They weren't interested in helping. That's where we're headed. And so what you're going to see is, if you put it in the big context of progress, right? Things are supposed to be getting better with time. We have technology, and then we have regulations, and we have, things of that nature. And then we go back, boom, to the Gilded Age. And then guess what happens here? More government controls. Government intervention, reform, another reform era. And that was the Dems here. That's our big picture. And then you get World War II, and then the Cold War, blah, blah, blah. Okay? This is a really important era for us to understand today and how we got here. And I think you're going to learn a ton. Okay. Have a nice day.